Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Theological Leftover. We are continuing to discuss this topic of defending and how we should go about defending. So far, we've had two brief videos, and they've both focused on the gospel. They've both focused on, in other words, our responsibility to defend the people around us by defending the gospel and sharing it with them. And the point that I've tried to make so far is there's no point in us talking about any kind of defending of one another emotionally or physically, or defending one another's reputation or any of that stuff, if as Christians we don't understand our need to defend the gospel for people, because it doesn't do any good to help people in the short term if long term they're doomed. If I defend my neighbor against my other neighbor, all the while letting sin, death, and the devil have its way with my neighbor, then I have failed to be a defender. And so gospel is front and center in terms of sharing it with our neighbor and protecting it from false teaching. But the gospel is also front and center when it comes to me providing any kind of defense or protection of my neighbor, even the more physical kind, because the gospel is the foundation for me understanding how I should use the gifts that God has given me. And I'm not going to have a proper understanding of how to use the gift of my strength, my reason, my wealth, any of those things, if I don't have a foundation of the gospel. And what I mean by that is simply this, is the temptation is for me to use what God has given me to try to hold on to what God has given me. There's an inherent self-centeredness in me and in each one of you. This idea that I have to protect myself, I have to protect my stuff first and foremost. And then if I have extra time, and if it doesn't interfere with me protecting myself, then I can protect other people. Usually first my family, because I consider them, I'm not saying they are, but I tend to consider them part of my stuff that I'm protecting, which is a terrible way, I know, to think of family as possessions. But I think that's how we tend to treat people, and how we tend to use this calling of defend. It's very self-centered. The gospel changes all that, because what I find out in the gospel is that God is actively defending me from sin, death, the devil, the world, all of it. And that he has given me something that is eternal and that can't be taken away from me. First and foremost, my relationship with him. There's nothing that can separate me from the love of God that I found where? In the gospel, in Christ Jesus. And so that's the foundation. Knowing that God is defending me, no question about it, changes how I look at my stuff and how I use my stuff, how I use my strength to defend my neighbor. I do, sometimes very poorly, but I do what God in Christ has done for me. I love my neighbor. Right? I use my stuff, I use it sacrificially for the sake of my neighbor, right? So the idea is this: God did not give you strength and influence to serve your own interests, okay? The other thing, though, is to keep in mind, and the gospel helps us to understand this. We're very quickly overwhelmed by the challenges of this world. We don't need to be. This world's been overcome, right? So we don't need to be overcome by those challenges. We're so easily tempted to be passive because the problems that we see in the lives of other people, sometimes immediately they just overwhelm us. But God did not give us strength. He did not give us the gifts that we have to be passive, but he gave them to us to support, protect, defend, build up our neighbor. In the Catechism, as Luther talks about the 10 Commandments, we see it over and over again. In the 5th commandment, he doesn't say just what we shouldn't do, but he says what we should do, and that includes help and support our neighbor in every physical need. In the 7th commandment, he says help him to improve and protect his possessions and income. That's pretty specific, isn't it? In the 8th commandment, defend him Speak well of him and explain everything in the kindest way. Protect his reputation. Ninth and 10th commandment, same thing. Help him. Be of service to him in keeping what is his property. And in the same way, when it comes to relationships, if we see people turning away from our neighbor, turning against them, then we urge them to stay and to do their duty. We encourage people to stay in relationship, not to flee relationships with our neighbor. So everything that we can do, all of our resources are brought to bear for these purposes, to love our neighbor. And this is how we defend them, right? So without question, we are called to protect and defend, and we are not called to be passive. And yet our primary focus in protecting and defending is not protecting and defending ourselves, but protecting and defending our neighbors. God defends us, and God uses us to defend our neighbors, right? And that's really the primary focus when we look at the 10 Commandments, especially when we look at what the scriptures have to say. I have an example, and I'm looking at the time here. I don't know what to do. I tell you what, I'm just going to give you these passages and encourage you to look at them. And I think I'm just going to stop after that, and then we'll take a look closer at these verses. Otherwise, this video is going to get too long, and I'm trying to keep these short. There won't be a video tomorrow, I don't think, because tomorrow I'm out of the office, but we'll pick up with these. What I want you to look at, you can look at these passages, or you can just look at this whole section, because all the passages I want to look at that I think will help us understand this idea of protecting and defending come from Genesis, and it's the same person in every one of these situations. We see him protecting someone, and the person he's protecting is the same person, right? So the protector and the protectee are the same person from Genesis 13 all the way through Genesis 18. And the protector, the defender here, is Abraham. And the person who's being defended is Lot. And we have 3 different examples of this, and they're not all the same. The first one is Genesis 13. And I'd encourage you to look at verses 7 through 11 especially, but it's Genesis 13. And then just go right to the next chapter, Genesis 14, especially 13 through 16, those verses. But Genesis 13, Genesis 14, and then skip a little bit to Genesis 18. And you're going to see Abraham protecting Lot in 3 completely different ways. But I would contend every one of these fits with what we just heard in the 10 Commandments. Every one of these is a type of protection. And what you'll see is Abraham, without question, willing to make sacrifices in order to protect and defend his neighbor, in this case, his nephew, Lot. And I think there's some wonderful examples for us to consider. So if you get a chance to look at them, that would be great. And then we will discuss them. I don't know if I'm going to do one at a time, or if I can do it quickly, we'll do more than one. Chances are we'll have to do one at a time, and this will carry over into next week. But take a look at them. I think that you will enjoy them, especially our first one will be Genesis 13, verses 7 through 11. And you might not get it at first, but Abraham is protecting Lot here. So take a look at that. All right. We will talk to you again on Saturday. Until then, God bless your day.